My name is Ajit Chaudhari. I'm a professor in the School of Health and Rehabilitation Sciences at Ohio State. That includes physical therapy, several other fields. And I'm going to be talking about the core running. And before I get into it, I just want to mention, I am a biomechanist. That's what I consider myself. My training is from mechanical engineering and biology, but there are other biomechanists who come from different backgrounds, whether that's medicine, physical therapy, exercise science and kinesiology, physics, materials science, lots of other areas, all people who come together to be interested in biomechanics. So, what is biomechanics? Biomechanics is a discipline that uses principles of physics to quantitatively study how forces interact within a living body. So that goes on the whole range of scales. From on the left, I've got an image of mitosis happening. So, how do those chromosomes get pulled apart? That's biomechanics. In the middle, I've got an image. It's actually an analysis of blood flow through the aorta, I believe. And then on the right, this is a really old drawing from sometime, I guess, in the Renaissance, of someone trying to analyze what the forces in your arm might be when you're holding a weight. So those are all biomechanics, different types of biomechanics, but I focus on the biomechanics that's on the right. Another way you can think about biomechanics, or I think about biomechanics, is of having a toolbox. And that toolbox has tools that were designed to help us with designing, building, analyzing different mechanical structures and systems like bridges, airplanes, backhoes. And so, now that we have those tools, we can apply them to the most complicated mechanical system on Earth, which is the human body. And by using that approach, it lets us really get some unique insights into some interesting questions like, why does the body break down? Or can we prevent injury and disease? Or can we help people perform better? So in my lab at Ohio State, we use these tools for a range of different applications, all of which have to do with how people move in doing activities of daily life or activities that are really important to them. And some of the things we've studied include baseball pitching, balance in cancer survivors, total knee replacement surgeries, function with a prosthetic hands, and running. And we've done other things too, but I'm going to focus today just on some interesting things we've been looking at with running. So why study running? For us, it's about public health. So many of you may be familiar with data like this. This is data from the CDC showing an increase in overweight and obesity, whether we're looking at kids or adults. And overweight and obesity have a lot of negative health effects, not just reducing your lifespan, but also making your quality of life worse. So we'd love to address this. One of the ways we can address it is by helping people become more active, physically active. Here's some data looking at how many people in the United States are active or inactive. And the top line, the pink one, is showing a pretty negative trend that there's an increase in people who are inactive, and that highest number is about 68 million people. On the plus side, we've got almost 50 million people who say they run at least once per year. And running is a really good physical activity because it's inexpensive. It doesn't require a lot of equipment. It can be social. It's high intensity, so you can really get your blood pumping. And so that might be a good avenue to get people more active. But there are some challenges with running. This graph is from a summary of the highest level scientific evidence on running injury incidents. And the different bars show different levels of runners. So on the left, it's novice runners to recreational runners to competitive runners, marathon runners, and then cross-country runners. And you can see that as we go to the left, less experienced, the bars are higher. And I don't want us to necessarily focus on the numbers here, but those novice and recreational runners, out of that 50 million or almost 50 million runners, these numbers mean that a quarter to a half of them will get injured every year. So that's a lot of injuries, and that might cause those people to stop running, and now they're inactive again. So we've done a lot of studies on this over the last several decades and spent a lot of money on scientific studies, but also on shoes and special socks and all kinds of things. But we still haven't really reduced the injury rate. So there's a hole here. There's something we're missing. So in my lab, what we've tried to do is look at not the scientists, but what are the people who are treating these runners doing? And that includes coaches and physical therapists and medical doctors. And one of the things that gets looked at a lot is how people move their pelvis and their trunk while they run. So this is a video analysis of somebody running on a treadmill, and you can see they've got this line showing how the pelvis is kind of dropping. So we said, gosh, that's interesting. And yet very few people have looked at that. Let's study that in the laboratory. And so we do a combination of experimental studies where we place reflectors on people and have them run in the laboratory. And then we do computer simulations of that. And by doing that kind of research, we hope to be able to inform, what muscles are active and what are they doing, so that we can give that information to those physical therapists, coaches, physicians, and they can design better exercise programs, for example, that would help strengthen the muscles or provide more endurance to the muscles or help people activate the right muscles so that we can reduce those injuries. So, doing that research really hopefully gets back to that clinical or coaching setting. And where does it start from? For us, it starts from Newton's second law, F equals ma, force equals mass times acceleration. So in physical science or physics in middle school and high school, it's kept pretty theoretical and simple. So like this diagram on the left here, a physics textbook is sitting on a table. Gravity's pulling down on the book, the table's pushing back up on the book, and the forces in the book are balanced. But that same sort of approach can be extended. We can do a two-dimensional analysis and try to estimate during this leg press activity, what's the force in the anterior cruciate ligament, or what's the force in the quadriceps tendon. And we can even get more complicated, go into 3 dimensions and have situations where people are moving and where you have multiple muscles crossing each other and doing things that are somewhat redundant but somewhat unique. And this becomes a very complex problem quickly, but we have computer tools to help us solve some of those things. So here, are you guys seeing the animation? Yeah, okay, great. So this is one of the computer models that we use, that we've developed to help study running and muscle activations during running. So in the diagram that's rotating on the left, the red lines are bundles or fascicles, parts of individual muscles. And you can see there are a lot of them, and they kind of cross over each other, and there's a lot of duplication of function. If we want to know what these muscles are doing, we can't measure that directly, in no small part because some of these muscles are deep inside the body, and we can't put a sensor on the outside and measure them. This other diagram is showing a little bit without the muscles, how the spine, for example, moves in this model. So we're trying to simulate as much as we can or as much as we need to get answers to some of the questions we want to ask. And then here's an example of a simulation based on experimental data we collected in the lab. So those two animations on the left are showing somebody running. You can see all those reflective dots there. And then we run the simulation to estimate what the muscles are doing. And in those diagrams, you can see the blue lines are muscles that are not active, whereas the red lines are muscles that are active. So by doing this, then we can now estimate what are the forces in the joints, for example, in the spine. The graph on the bottom right here is showing compression forces. So that's, squeezing the intervertebral discs across several levels of the spine. And I want to point out a couple things here. The first one is that it varies through a running cycle. It's not the same all the way through. So it's important to study the whole thing to know when is it higher or lower. Another thing we can do with simulations is ask sort of what if questions. What if the muscles that are really deep in your core, your torso, were weak? If those are weak, then other muscles might compensate, but what is the effect of that on the spine? And so these blue versus red bars are showing how things change when we weaken those deep core muscles. And we can see that some of those forces go up, some of them go down. So then here's a little summary of those results, and I'll point you to that diagram in the bottom right. So a compressive force at L2, that L2 vertebra, means force that's coming down from the vertebra above it. So that'll compress the intervertebral disc. Then we've got an anterior shear force, which is basically a force pushing sideways on that disc from above. So the graph on the left is showing that peak compressive force, and this L1, L2 is the brown line, dark brown line. So you can see as we weaken those deep core muscles, those forces go up because the other muscles that compensate to get the motion you want result in having this higher compressive force. And the effect is even more pronounced when we look at shear forces. So those go up as we weaken those deep core muscles. So what does that mean then for that runner? What we think it suggests is that they might be more likely to develop low back pain because of those loads getting experienced by the spine as, well, let's say one scenario would be those muscles are just weak for that person. Another might be that they don't have very good endurance, so they get weak as they run, and then later on in the run, these forces are going up. So then what do we do with that information then? Taking it back, what are the exercises we could do to strengthen and train the runner to activate those deep core muscles? Hopefully that'll lead to fewer people having to go to the physical therapist to improve their running technique and recover from an injury. So that's just a little view of some of the things we're doing. I want to acknowledge Margaret Van Horn. She's my former PhD student who did all of this work, and with assistance from Scott and Mike, two other PhD students, and then my other faculty collaborators from physical therapy, medicine, and athletic training. And this was funded by the National Institutes of Health. And I also want to point out for everybody in the audience, a couple of organizations that are really focused on outreach and really trying to help explain what biomechanics is to teachers, students all over the place. One is the American Society of Biomechanics, asbweb.org. And then the other is the Biomechanics Initiative, which runs this annual event called National Biomechanics Day. And wherever you are in the United States or maybe even the world, there may be a National Biomechanics Day event happening near you next April 2022. So check it out.